So then we are back with a more understanding from the time of the second tabernacle services, are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yishmael the prophet, we find a layer of understanding related with the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. These obviously are related with the section of Yishmael, the 61st chapter, where then we link up obviously with a layer of understanding of chapter 1:8. So then the cities of the Messiah returning, obviously the first is then the land of Cush, as per the instructions of the prophet. Then afterwards comes the 7 cities of Asia Minor, because each city must sound a shofar. In each city was granted an angel for this specific task. So then, with this understanding, then we find not only these cities, but later more cities until the number of the cities then are completed. And then lastly comes the cleaning up of Jerusalem, where then Zechariah is then obviously placed into motion. And then the people of Israel, then those who were chosen for the second tabernacle services completion, then they exit the holy cities and they make their routes up to Jerusalem for the pruning as per the instructions of Zechariah the prophet. That's where we find then 10 Gentiles would get a hold of the garment of the Hebrew and asking for teaching, but they won't be teaching while then they are en route, but they will point out to those Gentiles who are making testimonies on behalf of the Messiah. Those are then the work of Gentiles saved in the Messiah. The Hebrews, they are functioning people, and they only do a couple of situations. One of them, they function as they were told via the 7 spirits of Elohim. And then secondly, they make a route up to Jerusalem and then doing the pruning as per the instructions. The instructions are very clear. So then, we find a layer of understanding also related with the Gentiles. As we find then in Revelation chapter 1:8, known as Galah, you find then the Messiah speaking regarding the merchants and the merchants of the earth. The Messiah speaks of many situations regarding then the merchants of the earth, regarding then the cargo ships, the gold, silver, precious stones, pearl, and then fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, and every harmonic type of fragrance, also ivory, and then precious stones, marble, iron, and then ammonium, and then aromatics, unguents, and frankincense, and many other kinds of cargo, because what the Messiah saw was then during his time, the Messiah saw the future, and he had to project these prophecy as they were told previously. So the Messiah was not making up stories as he then went along when he was in the first holy city built by Yohanan. He was obviously projecting what the prophets previously projected. So then let's understand what goes on. The Messiah, prior of the spring feast, he was then acquainted with the holy instructions, and he knew the prophets had prophesied previously, and the Messiah's objective was to get in line precisely with what the prophets said. Not only during the spring feast, but then the autumn feast was already projected, and those situations were already known. So the Messiah then, he was simply explaining many areas, and as we can understand it very plainly, since the Messiah, he then completed the spring feast as told by the prophets, and the prophets gave step by step what the Messiah would do, because Moshe said, when this prophet comes, listen to him. Obviously, he was not only explaining situations of his own, but the prophets of old told the people step by step, day by day, step by step situations where the Messiah then spent 490 days precisely the spring feast. The autumn feast is precisely the same. because it makes the half of the Torah, half of the instructions, half of the prophets. So then there are no news situation regarding then the autumn feast. The prophets did prophesy and they gave many understandings of the autumn feast. However, unfortunately, the people did not understand. Many areas of Yirmiyahu, for instance, were ignored. Many of these holy instructions and his writings were ignored and destroyed. But we have the Messiah himself speaking of those layers, because the Messiah did not speak of his own. So when the Messiah is then given the understanding, he is simply in line with previously what the prophets had said. These make us protect from any kind of a non-Messiah writing. So then, let's say if the Hebrew brothers yet they are not convinced that the Messiah then truly is the Messiah. Let's understand the Messiah, he was already born and he is coming back. The situation is the Hebrew brothers during the time of, for instance, Yirmiyahu, they ignored many of the Megillahs Yirmiyahu wrote. These then later became a lacking point for the Hebrew brothers when the spring feast came and then the autumn feast also came. So these would obviously bring a lots of trouble, and then the future then from then on became very obscure. But the Messiah already came, and the situation is the holy cities must return, and the first holy city, as precisely as Yirmiyahu the prophet mentioned, on the land of Cush, where then the Hebrew brothers are going to practice what they did for thousands of years, as far as knowing what to do, as far as the relationship with the Creator, and then for more than 1,000 years, then the holy mikras themselves, or the rehearsals, are going to become then very known. So then, not only there is a knowledge of 1,000 years from behind us, for instance, until 1009, and then obviously when the Messiah was born, and prior of these thousands of years, they have then read many times the holy instructions, but the Messiah must do the autumn feast as prescribed by the prophets. We may not find a link sometimes with the details of what the Messiah saw because of those extra writings, and then the people destroyed them, unfortunately, because they were ignorant. So then that's a point where then we must understand in section where the Messiah then speaks, then in Galah, and then we find in the 23rd chapter of Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find a layer of understanding regarding then the merchants of the earth. Then you find Daniel explaining of the merchants of the earth. You find Ezekiel explaining the merchants of the earth. And you find the king of Tyre not only in Yirmiyahu, but you find in Ezekiel and you find in Daniel. So let's explore a bit what this situation is, because we must then understand the cleaning up of the teachings of Yishmael, because he was the first son of Ibrahim. It's extremely important then pointing out the 62nd chapter of Yirmiyahu, and this particular chapter is mostly related and then towards the Yishmaelites, because they are the people of trade. But they don't have the politics of their own, because the beauty of trade is the pure teaching of the Creator and Ibrahim, and then Ibrahim taught his first son. So then, let's try to understand the link of merchants in Galah chapter 1:8, where the Messiah then, after the Chinese system becomes available online, then the Messiah later, he warns them to return to their holy services. But let's understand steps of formation, because as the prophets gave us steps of formation, so must we understand steps of formation. We find then the chapter 1:8 of Galah. You find then Yirmiyahu the 23rd chapter. You find Yirmiyahu the 61st chapter. Yirmiyahu chapter 1:8. These are related. So what is the objective of this time of the restoration, since we are then 40 years after 2009? What is the objective? It's precisely then what Daniel and Ezekiel, and then obviously Yishmael a bit earlier, he then saw this future kingship of Tyre and Tarshish, and they found a near perfection of trade practices, precisely as Yishmael started his own company. He did because obviously brother Joseph, when he was then in Egypt, he was then brought over via his brothers, because they sold him to a caravan of the Ishmaelites. So then is given us very clear understanding they had the trades practice of the time. These practices must return. However, the politics must be removed. This gives us then precisely what Daniel said. Then also precisely what Yishmael said. Then the Creator himself must bring the glory of the politics of the kingship into contempt. This means the removal of power from governments and given to the merchants. This is absolutely sure, because the Messiah himself, when he speaks then on Gala chapter 1:8, he is explaining then the merchants of the earth having the authority of trade, precisely as then Yishmael started. Not only this, then tabernacling must be perfect as per the instructions of the prophet. Prior of the autumn feast, whatsoever the Creator spoke must be completed. So then we find this understanding very true and 100% precise, and we must be acquainting ourselves every day with what's coming in the future. For instance, some of the freighting companies, FedEx, UPS, DHL, and many other companies via air, sea, or land, or rail, those must be then in charge. The Messiah speaks because the layer of understanding of chapter 1:8 of Revelation, and also with Yishmael 23rd chapter, these are distinct layers of the same situation. However, when then Ezekiel and Daniel, they were together, they saw then the movements of the spiritual realm related with then tabernacling. They saw the Creator himself in the very center of the understanding, where then Ezekiel shows us those round situations, those round circles going around. Those are the synchronisms of the tabernacling, and also of the teachings of the Creator himself via his prophets, and the relationship of the synchronism with the earth. It's extremely important understanding these factors because they are interrelated. As we move forward and we understand the many political problems of our country and also of our planet, you find in, for instance, Egypt at the moment going through a lot of situations, and none other than making a deal with China will resolve their problem. There is no other way. The United States is trying to force themselves upon the world, and it's not going to work. The economy of India is already in trouble. The economy of Thailand is already in trouble. The economy of Australia, unfortunately, because of the coal, the mineral coal, is already also in trouble. So then we find again, then the 3rd chapter of Daniel, then the king of Babylon trying then to expose himself as the top dog, whereas then later we find the king was insane. So the United States is going so far, and then China is then returning, and this time they will set up then the dragon's system as per the instructions. So then later in the 20th chapter of Gala, then we truly find, and the dragon, and you find then later the destroyer. At the moment we are in the layer of understanding of the dragon. After 2009, starting in 2010, was then the period of the dragon. Precision. Devil no longer exists. Thus, we understand then evil truly exists, but not in the form of devil, because the facet of Nehashatan has changed from deceiver into then precision. Later then changes from dragon into destroyer, when then the holy cities then in Jerusalem are ready then for the final combat. So we have then 10 plus 90 years to get the rest of this age then closed. The prophets were very clear. The prophecies are clear. The layers are holy. And the holy documents, they are absolutely precise in its minimum details, where you find in every layer upon each other, and then finding these section very pertinent for our time, where the United States then becomes out of place until China then takes its stand and comes against the United States. And the Creator is going to be on their favor, in favor of China, to get then the system of the dragon set up, where then many governments, many governments, will to be under the control of the computer. So then the devilish side of those people, or the devilish side of those people, won't be able then to steal from the people, making then the systems precise. This is precisely then what you are waiting for, because then obviously we find then Galah true to itself. So then later on we're going to evaluate more the situation with the Congo, because then obviously Yishmael the prophet mentioned chapter 1:8, woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. And that's to study more of what then Congo is then awaiting for. Not only Congo itself, but then the relationship of the BRICS country. And next month, on the 5th of September, the G20 then visits, and let's evaluate what the decisions are, because the United States decided to manipulate the USD, and they are not working. The United States are simply then manipulating the USD and rely on themselves, while then destroying the other economies. Since the last push of the United States, you already found then China retrieving. We found then India already in trouble. You find Thailand in trouble. And you find many other countries already in crisis because of the encroachment of the United States. But it goes so far as then the king of Babylon, he built his own statue of gold and didn't work. We find the example repeating itself, and at some point United States will retrieve. So let's understand later more layers, and understand then the king of Tyre and Tarshish during the time of Ezekiel and Daniel, and also mentionings of Yishmael a couple hundred years before, where then these prophecies were then projected into the future. So then we can only understand what the Messiah said, but only also the autumn feast, so then we can be more acquainted with it. Thus far, waiting for the sound of the shofar. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.